Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate our witnesses being here today. As a former naval aviator that spent more time than I care to remember in mop gear, and now here in Congress reading about the threat and understanding how significant it is, I used to always just, the value in those exercises to me was just praying to God that it never happened. But you all don't have that luxury. You've got to deal with it, and it's a very real threat that I fear too often is backburnered. It doesn't get the attention it needs, and I know that's not the only things that you have on your plates, but it's vitally important. And if it ever happens, it'll probably be one of the worst things that's ever happened to the United States. But I do have a couple of questions, and Admiral Green, you and I have had some conversations about the authorities and helping me understand how all of this shakes out, because it's a very complex problem set. But I understand SOCOM's coordinating authority on the front end. I am curious, though, who would be the coordinating authority in the event, in an actual event, after the fact?
Well, a coordinating authority does not command, it doesn't convene, it recommends. So
I understand. On your end, it's preparation of, coordinating the operational plans. It's helping with the strategies. But if all of that fails and we find ourselves with an actual event, who is then responsible? Because it seems very complex to me as to who takes charge then.
Yeah, I would say simply it's the combatant commanders. I mean, they execute the campaigning day in and day out, and they own the contingency plans and the O plans. As we speak, General Walters owns the EUCOM AOR. So this venue, the coordinating authority simply tries to support an understanding of the threat, identifying resourcing gaps, and then making recommendations across policy and force provider issues. But ultimately, it's the combatant commanders.
Okay. So if we had a contaminated environment, obviously the COCOM's going to have to execute the battle plan and keep going forward. But how do we go about, who coordinates the mitigation efforts to allow them to continue to move forward? And whoever might want to answer that. It's just, I have a hard time understanding how it unfolds after the fact.
So that would be done actually on the ground operationally. By the joint force right there. So if you were to have a contaminated environment on, say, a logistics or a flow-through base that the United States or its allies were using, and were they to be contaminated, the forces immediately there on the base would be dealing with decontaminate, I apologize, that area and the equipment in order for the force to be able to continue to proceed with its mission.
Okay. We saw with great success, I think, during this COVID pandemic, with Operation Warp Speed, what DoD collaboration with DHS has been able to do. I'm interested to know, what lessons we've learned from that, how we're going to perpetuate that going forward, so that we can be prepared for future things. And then also, as we deal with adversaries like Russia and China, where companies are either state-owned or at least sponsored, and there's that collaborative effort just by design of how their governments function. They're working together in a lot of cross-purpose type technologies. How are we, and how could we better work with not only our other government agencies like DHS, but on the civilian side with our pharmaceutical companies, with our biomedical research? What are we doing to get better at that?
Thanks, Congressman. On the first part of your question about how the pandemic has given us some lessons learned, I think on the highest level, the takeaway is the department can't afford to think about biothreats as a nation-state battlefield weapon, and has to include pandemic preparedness as well as specific agent design preparedness. And so the bioposture review that we're undertaking, biodefense posture review, is looking at this from a whole spectrum to include that part. And I think that's a big lesson that we've all, I don't know if learned or relearned.
Yeah, what I would just add to that, Congressman, is on the research, development, and acquisition side. One of the things that we are beginning to pivot away from is the focus on a singular agent, but rather the reality is that we are going to have more broad spectrum kinds of both drugs as well as vaccines. And our continuous consultation, certainly with the pharmaceutical industry, is helping us with that. And I can go into further detail in the closed session as well.
Can we get it
Great,
approved?
thank you. And I yield back.